Do the tough things first.
Ray Zinn now imparts his management philosophy in Tough Things First. Zinn covers the gamut from the essence of human happiness
Having value is key to human happiness.
to the downside of venture capital for entrepreneurs,
Venture capital can be the antithesis of entrepreneurial spirit.
the essence of entrepreneurial discipline.
An entrepreneur without determination is truly an oxymoron.
Ray Zinn, Silicon Valley's longest-serving CEO.
Welcome to what will prove to be an interesting Q&A episode of the Tough Things First podcast. Today we are taking 3 of the many questions I've received from the Tough Things First audience or from various events where Ray has spoken. And if you have a question for Ray Zinn, the longest-serving CEO in Silicon Valley, send them to podcast@toughthingsfirst.com. We will try to answer your questions as soon as we can. But if you are impatient, as most entrepreneurs are, then buy yourself a copy of Ray's book, Tough Things First. Tough Things First artfully distills Ray Zinn's 37 years as the founding CEO of the most consistently profitable semiconductor company in Silicon Valley. If you have any questions about leadership, management, employee motivation, and everything else it takes to run a business, Tough Things First is required reading for entrepreneurs and seasoned executives alike. So let's get to these listener questions. Ray, a hearty good morning to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Guy. Glad to be with you.
Our first question is one I find personally interesting because of my propensity to take on too many projects. A listener asks, as an entrepreneur, how do you prioritize the many things that require your attention?
Okay, well, what I do is I always do the tough things first, which goes along with the theme of our book. So getting those tough things first out of the way allows me more freedom and time to accomplish those other very complex and interesting tasks that I have during the day. So if you want to improve your efficiency by at least 30%, get those tough thing first issues out of the way, which are really those things you don't like doing, and so therefore you tend to procrastinate them. But because of the fact that they're procrastinated means that you have to think about them about 10 times during the day, and that detracts you from doing those important things that you want to get done. So that's the way I do it. The other thing that I like to comment on is people say don't sweat the small things. Well, I do, because the small things can become big things if you let them get away from you. So pay attention to all the details. If you learn to efficiently manage your time by doing the tough things first, then doing the small things, which will prevent them from becoming the big things, will help you be more successful as an entrepreneur.
I certainly agree with getting those big things out of the way. In fact, one of the tricks my father taught me a long time ago was that you make a list of the 10 things you got to accomplish every morning, and then you sort them in the order of the least desirable that you want to do. And your day tends to get progressively easier as you go from there.
That's like eating the ugly frog first.
So the next question that we have, hopefully not from an ugly frog in the audience, she asked kind of a two-parter question. The first part is, who were your business and life heroes while you were growing up? And then she follows up with, which business leaders do you currently follow and respect?
Well, that's a good one. Of course, growing up, you have to ask what age level. So if you're talking about as a very young person, of course, it was my mother and my father were the ones I looked up to because they're the ones that I associated with the most. As I became a teenager, of course, it would be my friends, those that I associated with. But getting now older and then having to think about my career, the individuals that I really highly regarded, of course, being a Christian, Jesus Christ is setting the proper example for all of us. And then, of course, because I grew up in the 50s, Dwight Eisenhower was a idol of mine or hero, and John Wayne because of his, being the man that he was, and so I enjoyed watching him, and of course Roy Rogers, and none of you will recognize those names, but those were my heroes as a kid.
Which business leaders do you currently follow and respect? Who do you think is out there really creating enduring businesses and managing them well?
Well, any company that has, I think, a good business base should be followed and admired. In my industry, of course, I look at the semiconductor companies that have done well. TI has done well over the years and still thrives. Intel's been up and down and had difficulties, so has Hewlett Packard. But I did admire the original founders of Hewlett Packard, Bill Hewlett and David Packard. I admired them because of the HP way that they brought into being, and I try to copy the HP way at Micrel.
I personally know a lot of people who have worked for Hewlett Packard, and they certainly sing the blues nowadays about the way that the HP way seems to have been kicked to the curb. I think we have time for one more question, so let's dive into this. And we're saving some other questions for other episodes. So, Ray, one person wanted to know, how do you balance research and development and other long-term product innovation processes against the seemingly constant demand of investors in Wall Street for short-term profits?
That's a very good question, because that's the one that seems to cause us the most problems and pain, is trying to manage the delicate and very precious resources of research and development. So what we did, of course, is we looked at both the long-term and the short-term of our R&D. Some you have to do instantaneously because they might affect customer deliveries, and that requires R&D resources to either fix a problem or to improve on a particular product. Then the long term, of course, is the ones that require 2 or 3 years, maybe even 5 years of development. And if you don't do that, then you're really casting away your future and not planning for a lengthy path. As you know, that I ran Micrel for 37 years, and we had projects that would take 3 to 5 years to develop, and those were important. But you have to be careful, because your bucket size for research and development is all based on what kind of op margins that you think you can garner in your business. In our industry, research and development ran about 15% of revenue. And so you want to make sure you stay kind of within that boundary area, or your investors will get upset because it will affect your op margins.
Well, and so here's a question from me, because we know that the semiconductor industry goes through these wild cycles. And one of the things I saw in a chart once, that R&D tends to dip a little bit, or at least not be aggressive during the down cycle. Do you think that's a bad thing that the semiconductor industry does? Should they be keeping steady, or even perhaps ramping up R&D even when there's profit pressure, so that they can design their way into the next upcycle?
Well, you are in a kind of a box. I mean, you're going to have to protect your earnings, or your stock is going to suffer. So if you're a public company, you have to pay attention to your bottom line. And as a consequence, R&D may suffer, at least to some degree. So during the last downturn that began in 2008, we decided as a company that we were not going to reduce R&D, and in fact we were going to increase it a little bit, just so we could plan for the upswing when the economy recovered. That turned out to be a problem for us, because the recovery lasted longer than anybody ever expected. No one would have expected or believed that we would have had close to 10 years of downturn during this last recession. And I was looking for more like a couple of years, but because of the length of it, that hurt us. So we had to then start paring back R&D a couple of years ago, because the economy did not look like it was going to recover anytime soon.
Well, thanks first to Ray for answering those questions. Thanks to everyone who I've met along the journey who have been asking these questions of Ray. And we'll try to weave more questions into future episodes of the Tough Things First podcast. If you want to get closer to Ray, social media is the great place to start. See the contact page at toughthingsfirst.com for Ray Zinn's LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook contact points. And don't forget to subscribe to the Tough Things First podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, Podcast Addict, Stitcher, TuneIn, and all the other popular podcast apps.